continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. As we were discussing previously, the post-mortem from much of the left, at least the leftist media types, is that Trump was victorious because racism, sexism, even heightism.
If she were a 6'4" white man from Arkansas or from Florida, and she ran a good middle of the road campaign talking about reaching out, do you think she would be losing by that much? If she could like chew tobacco and carry a shotgun and talk about football and be a guy's guy, I mean, you tell me. Well, let's. Such
an elitist snob.
Joe Scarborough there offering that keen insight. And it continued throughout election night and into the morning, morning after, including with those delicate flowers on the view. Sunny Hostin.
I'm surprised at the result, but I'm not surprised. As a woman of color, I was so hopeful that a mixed-race woman married to a Jewish guy could be elected president of this country. Mm-hmm. And I think that it had nothing to do with policy. I think this was a referendum of cultural resentment in this country.
Well, the honkies did it. I know Joy Reid was very angry with the honkies, particularly the honky women. I got it. Something about those honkies, though. There was a good piece in the Wall Street Journal a week before the election by Mene Ukaburwa, who's an editorial board member of the Journal, talking about that portion of the electorate that nobody was really talking about, except pejoratively like that, using them as scapegoats. We talked a lot about it, too, talking about the Muslim vote in parts of Michigan that could be impactful, and we're talking about the percentage of Latino vote that Trump is getting, the percentage of black vote, particularly black men, and so on and so forth. But something else that happened that didn't get much conversation, I'm glad that Ukaburwa pointed this out in the Journal, because it also gives lie to this post-mortem rationalization you're getting from the mouthpieces for the left. On August 15th, less than a month after she became the Democrat nominee, Ms. Harris trailed Trump by 12 points among white voters, was tied with him among all voters 60 or older on August 15th. Since then, these voters have fled from Harris. By October 26th, she was down 22 points among whites and 8 points among seniors. And in point of fact, he points out, this is a piece that was published on October 30th, a week before, Trump's support among blacks and Hispanics was flat. His share of voters 18 to 29 rose, but only 7 points. Yet it was at that point that he surpassed Kamala for the first time in overall support. You're looking at the polling averages nationally. In other words, he writes, older and white voters contributed much more to Trump's recent rise going into the final days than their younger and non-white peers. Progressive elites who sniff racism and sexism around every corner are wondering whether old whites have abandoned Ms. Harris because they can't abide a black female president, as you just heard. But the allegations of prejudice can't quite explain why older whites were willing to give her a chance and even inclined to support her on August 15th, and by October 26th, they had moved in the other direction. So when Sunny Hostin says it's not about policy, well, it turns out it is in part, and perhaps it's in part on character, too. They knew Kamala Harris was a black female when she got into the race. Most of them probably knew her as vice president, at least that much about her. But when the Kamala Harris' record started getting examined, and when she started doing interviews and trying to explain things like her 180s on a variety of issues, this is where she started to shed people. And as I was saying at the time, she can't pull this off. There's just no art in her artifice. Yeah. And ironically, it perhaps culminated on that very program with Sonny Austin, The View, when she was unable to come up with something she would do differently than Biden, even though the branding of her campaign was supposed to be turning the page and doing things differently.
Yeah, that was the nail in the coffin, I think.
For more on all of this and other related issues, we're pleased to be joined by Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review, author of The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Howdy. Thanks for having me.
Howdy. Speaking of howdy and speaking of fun, I mean, just as a quick aside, we just had a suggestion from a caller that I think you'll find fun. We're talking about all the potential persons for Trump's cabinet and other sensitive positions. Somebody suggested Ted Nugent for Department of Interior. What do you think?
I don't know if he has the skill set. Certainly has the communications chops, though.
Oh, yeah.
Probably
Exactly.
make that office really fun.
What
He
about
could have, he could have somebody does
for the job, though.
somebody does the day to day, and he's just the the face guy. Yeah, I like that.
and Noah, somebody else suggested Mike Rowe as labor secretary.
Oh, I like
That's
that too.
That's actually a more serious suggestion. I think he would probably do a pretty good job on that. He'd hate it. He would hate the role, but he would probably pull it off.
So give us your summation on what happened on Tuesday.
Well, a global take is that this race was probably over months ago. And it just didn't show up in the data. And we will never be able, it's at this point, because Donald Trump is not constitutionally capable of running again, we will never be able to fix the problems associated with reaching Donald Trump's voters. And not because that pollsters hadn't tried or hadn't applied methods that made it easier to capture white working class voters. They did, and they largely accounted for a lot of that problem. But if you think it's tough to get a hold of white working class Americans with low social trust who don't answer the phone, who don't really trust institutions or media outlets, and don't talk to pollsters, try applying that to young African American males. It's infinitely more difficult, and the same problem arose, and there was no time to fix it or address it because we don't understand the contours of it. We only have data now to address it. But exit polling, to the extent that it's valuable, and it's not really just yet, there are still probably like 10 million, 15 million votes still out in the West. And it takes a long time to count those votes, and only then will we have all the votes and weight them necessarily to make the exit polls make sense. Right now, they're not representative data. But it's data. And when it's really, really lopsided, we can make some inferences. And one of the lopsided trends is that voters pretty much made their decision in this election before September. 80% of voters, according to their unweighted early exits, made their decision in September. And the lopsided nature of these results suggests that the vast majority of those voters had committed to Donald Trump in the summer. So there's a potential for us to look back on these last 2.5 months of this campaign and really conclude that nothing actually mattered, that the die was cast probably around the first assassination attempt against Donald Trump, and everything else was just a series of motions to the inevitable conclusion.
Well, just taking what you suggest as a starting point, if 1/5 of the voters had not made their decision by September, then the last 60 days did matter.
Well, they did. So those same early exits found independents, pure independents, going for Harris by 3 points, 49% to 46%. I don't know if that'll hold up over when we find out all the votes that are cast in the West. But it's probably a margin that will not move so much. And a lot of the polling captured in the last week of the election indications that independents were moving in Harris's direction. that they were late breaking for her, which is abnormal. You would expect, given the environmental conditions that favor Republicans and the nature of the incumbent anti-incumbent dynamic, that undecided voters this late in the process would break to somebody who represents a challenge to the incumbent. And we weren't seeing that necessarily, and the exits. Or we were seeing that in the polling. We were seeing, or rather, weren't. We were seeing independents gravitate towards Kamala Harris in sort of counterintuitive ways. And it does seem like the exits bore that out. But the overwhelming strength of Donald Trump's coalition comes from not just unaffiliated voters, but also Democratic voters. And we're seeing this across the board. It's a classic red wave. The shift is all but uniform. And it's mostly pronounced where Republicans had a lot of room to grow. Where do they have a lot of room to grow? In the suburbs, exurbs, and in big cities.
Well, what about the
big cities?
Yeah. Oh,
Donald Trump did really well. He won 5 wards in Philadelphia.
Yep.
I mean, there's no Republican that you can say has ever matched that performance.
So the Democrats need to rebrand themselves. And I mean, they did try to go after rural voters by pandering to their base by, showing camouflage hats with, Harris Walls hats, and showing that he's a hunter, he's a man, but not too masculine. What are they going to do now? Remember that? He can hunt, but then there's a softer side to Tim Walz too.
Yes. Well, I mean, the gender dynamic of this race is really quite fascinating, and it's very difficult for Democrats to talk about it because they just don't have the vocabulary. They're afraid of the sort of conclusions that I think you would have to draw, which is that their efforts to appeal to men were coming from a place of that is very condescending and, at the risk of being offensive, rather feminized in a way that was not appealing to men, and not feminized in the way that men actually like, because men do like women.
Yeah,
but in a way that's
and women like manly men.
Well, wait a second. But
it is. I'm sorry.
Tampons.
Are you saying that Coach didn't come across as particularly masculine?
It is, but
Maybe
it is
tampons.
masculine it's masculine in a caricatured way.
Of course,
that a showrunner in Hollywood would write it, which is in a way that's. It's so difficult to talk about this in ways that Democrats will not react to it as though you are part of the problem, because they've convinced themselves that expressions of masculinity, conventional masculinity, are deleterious to the social fabric, are antisocial themselves. And so when they appeal to men, it sounds like a showrunner in Hollywood who has written the stereotypical doofus role for the classic straight white male who just can't navigate his environment adroitly. He's
Right.
just kind of a bumbling, stumbling fool who needs to have his hand held and guided to the proper conclusions in life, because otherwise he wouldn't be able to tie his own shoes, and he would probably burn things down. And is capable of a lot of aggression that needs to be socialized out of him. It's offensive and condescending, and suggests a lack of contact with actual human beings who are socialized properly in an American social milieu. It's mistrustful of men, and it's men picked up on it. It's kind of hard to miss.
Called himself a knucklehead.
Well, the other thing too, I mean, those 2 closing ads that they ran with the men and women going to vote. The men are they just got just climbed down from a duck blind, and they went to the polling place, and then they're okay, let's everybody get out and vote, and then 2 guys staring at each other, knowing with a knowing glance, and they color in the Walls, the Harris Walls bubble and so forth, like it's okay to secretly vote against these goons that you're friends with, and then they did the same thing with women who are under the thumb. Or the wives who are under the thumb of their men. Okay, honey, you go vote, and I'll sit here and pick my nose. And then the knowing glance, and all that. It was everybody, every man in America who's not in touch with their feminine side, like good old Doug Emhoff, is Al Bundy. and and every woman is under the domineering thumb of her husband. I mean, it's so insulting.
I don't know what country these people live in. It's profoundly offensive. You're allowed to take offense if your appeal here is saying, well, we know your husband will beat you if he makes the wrong decision. So you don't have to tell him. And the alternative to that is, well, men, you're going to go into the polling place, and if you have a modicum of consideration for the women in your life, to say nothing of your own daughters, you will vote for abortion. A lot of those men want to be grandpas. Right. They're not necessarily in favor of maximalist maximalist license for abortion. And you know what? A lot of those men are also Catholic. The Democratic Party has sacrificed its appeal to Catholics in a way that's pretty remarkable. The Catholics shifted dramatically towards Republicans, and not just because Kamala Harris skipped the Al Smith dinner. That's so inside baseball that it's remarkably Washingtonian, but it is bouncing around out there. But the notion here that Americans are hostile to abortion restrictions across the board is just not true. There's a lot of squishes on abortion, and if you look at the actual just saying Americans are pretty much in favor of few restrictions when it comes to the first trimester. But those voters shifted dramatically towards Republican. And it was basically even if you favor that kind of abortion regime, which is illustrative of the Democratic Party's failure across the board here, that they pushed all their chips in on the only hand they had. It just turned out to be a losing hand.
Well, and the other thing, though, too, in terms of what we're getting post-mortem wise from that camp, at least it's outspoken its most outspoken institutionalists in media and academia, is like 2016 redux. I mean, they learned absolutely nothing over the last 8 years. You could cut and paste the comments they're making in the last 24 hours and apply it to 2016 and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats are just addicted to the idea that they can balkanize the electorate and identify little slivers of hyper-ethnic concentration and set them against each other, pit them against one another in mutually antagonistic little exclusive cantons. And that's just not how it works. I mean, Donald Trump managed to outflank that strategy, not because he was appealing to minority voters. Again, Democrats don't have the vocabulary to talk about this. He wasn't appealing to minority voters in a way that Democrats recognize as appeals to minority voters, because it wasn't specific. It was very general. He was talking about things that Latinos care about, because he was talking about things that everybody cares about.
Right.
He was talking about things that Jewish voters and black voters care about, because he was talking about things that everybody cares about. I mean, the notion here that you can balkanize the electorate like Democrats seem to think they can has been disproven on a couple of occasions. Sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't. And if you zoom out on American politics now, over the last 10 years, 11, 12 years, what's the aberration? The aberration isn't Donald Trump's election. The aberration isn't the Republican takeovers of Congress in 2014. The aberration is 2020. 2020 is the weird one. That's the outlier. And even the Democrats coming back in the midterms in 2018 is pretty standard for, your first midterm of a new presidency. That sort of thing looks normal. What doesn't look normal is Joe Biden's election in 2020, which, by the way, before Donald Trump started beating the drum about the stolen election thing and cost Republicans 2 Senate seats in Georgia, voters in their collective wisdom performed a surgical excision of Donald Trump from the political scene while leaving the entire Republican Party intact. Indeed, Republican majorities in Congress grew in 2020, even though Donald Trump lost. And the reversal of that condition is just a return to form. So when you have this big global 30,000-foot perspective on American politics, it looks like Joe Biden is the outlier and Donald Trump is the normal.
Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review, author of the book The Rise of the New Puritans, Fighting Back Against Progressives' War on Fun. Noah, thanks as always.
Thank you.
Thank you. Always good to have you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Hi, I'm Ken Mariotti, owner of Woodland Windows and Doors, a third-generation family-owned business since 1969. We know you're bombarded by choices when shopping for new windows or doors, so we're inviting you to experience the Woodland difference. For decades, we have been transforming living spaces with Marvin Windows, a fifth-generation family business. Marvin replacement windows have been known to increase the warmth of your cold rooms by 10 degrees. Think about that. 10 degrees warmer. When you welcome Woodland into your home, you will get a product expert to transform your living spaces, full-time, dedicated professional installers that you can trust in your home, along with the best products like Marvin. These are the reasons we're proud of our 5-star reviews in family